Welcome to Paranormal Heart, a place where people can talk about their paranormal experiences. With your host, Kat Ward.
Welcome, my friends, to Paranormal Heart Podcast, a safe place to talk about your paranormal encounters. I'm your host, Kat Ward. Folks, in episode 119 of the podcast, we have a special guest named Chucky Danger, who will be discussing his fascinating research on Bigfoot and Ultraviolet. He will explain how Bigfoot may use UV to see and give us a glimpse of what our world looks like from a UV perspective. Additionally, he talks about how UV could help in various paranormal investigations. If you're interested in learning more, you can follow Chucky Danger on Instagram. I've included the link in the show notes for your convenience. If you have any stories related to our paranormal experiences like ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, extraterrestrials, local legends, or your psychic gifts, I would love to hear from you. You can be a guest on the show and share your story, or you can send me your real story for me to narrate on the show. You can reach out to me at paranormalheart13@gmail.com. If you want to remain anonymous, I will make sure not to mention your real name. New episodes of the show are released on the second and last Sunday of each month at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube, Podbean, KPNL Digital Network, and all major podcast platforms. If you wish to support the show, please share it with others. Like each episode, and don't forget to leave a review. It will help us reach more people and make them realize that they are not alone in their paranormal experiences. Additionally, you can now find Paranormal Heart Podcast merchandise on Teepublic. You can buy mugs, t-shirts, hats, and more. So please share the Teepublic link with others. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, Charles. Welcome to Paranormal Heart Podcast.
Hi, Kat. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I have to give a special shout out to our sister, JJ Rose 777. She's the one that told me about you, and I think she told you about me as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, JJ.
We love you, JJ. I send it back. So if you could give us a little bit of background about yourself, and then we can jump in. I'm really looking forward to hearing everything that you have to say.
Sure. I'm an amateur researcher into the wonderful world of Sasquatch and most things paranormal. Very amateur level. Mostly because I just do it by myself. I am also a co-host with the Countercult podcast. And you can find us on any normal podcatcher and on Rumble. And I have an Instagram where you can come and check out all my research photos and whatnot as Chucky_Danger on Instagram. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Great. So when did all of this start for you? When did you start having this fascination with Bigfoot? And how does the UV fall into it?
Well, the Sasquatch thing has kind of been like a hindsight's 2020. I had a lot of experiences that I didn't really realize were Sasquatch until I started to listen to Sasquatch Chronicles and started hearing collaborating evidence from a lot of other people. So I hunt the same area like all the time since I was a young child with my dad. And we hunt this really steep hillside that no one really goes to. It's a spot where the deer feel safe. So it's, great spot for me and Dad, but nobody ever takes the effort to go down this steep hillside because it's really thick bush and everything too. But it benches off a couple times. And on each one of these benches is a really heavy deer trail. So one summer, I decided to go in there before hunting season and set up a trail camera. And I know that the batteries in trail cameras will attract bears because they smell like an ant nest. So I put the trail camera rather high up in the tree, and I wedged a piece of wood behind it so it's angled down towards the trail, so I didn't miss the deer as they walk by. Now, I left the trail camera up in the tree for probably about a month, and then I came back to check my SD card, and this is really my first time playing around with the trail camera, so I was rather excited for it. I get back to the tree, and my trail camera is gone. The strap is still hanging onto the tree, but just by a thread hooked onto a piece of bark. The buckle had actually been snapped. And I thought someone had just stole my trail camera, which I wasn't really expecting, especially in that spot. So in my frustration, I started to do a perimeter check of just circling out away from the tree in a spiral, looking for the trail camera. And I happened to find it 20 yards downhill beside a fallen over tree. Now the case was facing the sky, and it was actually open. And to open the case of the trail camera, you need fingers to undo the two latches. There was no teeth marks, no claw marks, and it was just really strange. When I took the camera home and I checked the photos, the camera was taken off the tree the day after I put it up. And in the very corner of the frame of the picture, you see a tiny bit of long hair. But you do not see anything else. And then there's a couple photos of sky and absolutely nothing else. So whatever had done this had come from behind the tree, grabbed the front of the case, and ripped it forward off the tree. And used fingers to undo the latches on the case, did not steal the SD card, and just left it there out of the way of the trail.
Definitely not a deer.
Definitely not a deer. So that was the first instance in this area. There's a valley across the way that I'm camping at with some friends. So as the crow flies, it's really not that far away. And there's two lakes, and they're neighboring each other by like a trail through a swamp that's like 200 yards or so. And we were being really loud, noisy teenagers, just having a good time. We were shooting potato cannons across the lake and playing loud music all day long. So we were not quiet. Nothing should be coming into camp. And I think on the second or third night, I asked everyone to quiet down for just a moment, and I'll see if I can do my trick where I can call the owls. So I go by the edge of the lake and I do an owl call, and I get a response. And so I do it again, and I get another response. And then another owl on the other side of the lake pipes up. And then another owl, and then another owl. And the neighboring lake, 2 or 3 owls over there started to pipe up. And so there was this cacophony of owl calls around the lake. And I started to laugh because it just was so absurd. And one of the girls actually did start to get a little bit scared and asked me to knock it off. Now, the first owl that spoke up started to devolve into this mix between a chimpanzee and a kookaburra. A really fast chatter. And I just thought it was a demented owl. I wasn't really thinking Sasquatch at the time. So we left that alone, and these dozen or so owls all just quieted down, and we went back to playing loud music and whatnot. Later that night, most everyone had gone to bed. There was like 3 or 4 of us left around the campfire, and there's a big gravel parking lot in this forest campsite where we all parked our trucks. And as we're talking around the campfire at like 4 a.m, we hear really fast running across the gravel and this deep guttural growl just really quickly. And we turn around and we did not see a thing. We all had flashlights, so we turned them on and we're looking around. We can't see anything. And a couple people that were in tents heard all our commotion about what was going on. And they said that something had been touching the side of their tent. And we couldn't decide what it was. We thought maybe it was like a deranged coyote or something like that. But what would come into the camp like that when you're playing loud music? It doesn't make any sense.
The wildlife is going to want to stay away.
Exactly. And then I started to listen to Sasquatch Chronicles and hear so many people tell stories about Sasquatch mimicking owl calls. And I started to put the pieces together. And then I heard one other gentleman in the entire 1,000 plus episodes that Wes has recorded. He explained it the exact same way I have. It sounded like a mix between a chimpanzee and a kookaburra. And I just got chills.
You must have been excited, too, to know that somebody else had the same experience.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Very much. So we go 2 years ago. I was out hunting. Well, I had bought a new scope for my rifle, and it came in the mail a little bit late, so it's already October, and I needed to sight it in after I put it on my rifle. So I wait for a day where I had it off work, and I go out later in the morning so I could let the hunters have a good fair chance at hunting, and I'd go set up a target in a cut block. So there's this big steep hillside, and I put my target out about 100 yards, and I'm comfortable sitting, shooting. I put, a dozen or so rounds downrange with 30-06. That's very loud. I had my hearing protection on, so I couldn't really hear anything. And I think I was listening to podcasts while I was shooting, so if there was any noise, I didn't hear it. However, downrange from where I was shooting, up on the hill, this 8 to 9 inch in diameter tree started to just start whipping back and forth really aggressively. And there was no wind at the time, and it didn't make any sense at all. So even though I was holding a gun, I did not feel brave enough to climb up that hill and see what was there.
Yeah.
I think I put another round downrange just to make sure that I was finished doing what I needed to do, and then I quickly packed up and left.
And that was the only tree that was moving?
That was the only tree that was moving. Now, I got really curious about this, and I kind of kicked myself for not going up the hill to see. I went back the following spring, and I wanted to just get photos of the tree and get a better idea of what was actually going on there, because I can't see a bear moving the tree like that, nor a moose, and a person would not come downrange of someone shooting a gun like that. It doesn't make any sense. So I took photos of the tree, and at the base of it, there was a bunch of other cedar trees. So even if I had gone to the top of the hill, I wouldn't have been able to see what was at the base of it. It was rather bushy. The force it would take to move that tree is incredible. because I couldn't get it to move.
Hmm.
I go a little bit north of where that tree was, and there's a rotten log on the ground that the deer and moose like to use as a deer bed. So I was checking that out for signs, because you can usually see hairs in them and whatnot, get a good idea of what the animals are doing around the area.
Mm.
And I happened to see a footprint. And I'm looking at this footprint, and it's a bare humanoid footprint, but it's very bad quality. In my estimation, it was about 14 inches long, but not castable because it was in that rotten wood substrate. But it was really cool to get that corroborating evidence of the event that happened the following fall, or previous fall.
Yeah.
So that really got me curious about Sasquatch. And again, like I said, I've listened to all of the Sasquatch Chronicles episodes, and you start to hear really strange things like glowing red eyes or eye shine. And a lot of people consider that to be woo-woo. And I don't think so. There has to be a good explanation for how that works. And so I started to look at existing animals that have nocturnal vision and how that might work. Beyond our comprehension, really. And I started off finding these photos of owls that are being photographed in ultraviolet light. And there's this really cool study where you can take 3 different owls from 3 different regions around where you live. And the bands on their flight feathers will fluoresce in different patterns depending on where they come from, which is really cool.
That is cool.
It allows them to identify where they come from and who's who.
Bump. I love that.
Yeah. But it really opened my eyes to see that there's a whole nother world happening beyond our eyesight. And so I started to look at other nocturnal animals. And when you see a photograph of a flying squirrel, what do you normally see?
Just a flying squirrel and the skin's outstretched between the arms. You know, you don't really...
They're usually brown or
yeah.
gray. When you put them into the ultraviolet light, they start to go pink and orange and blue. They get all kinds of crazy colors. And it's a way that they can see each other in the dark forest at night rather easily. And it goes into a lot of communication, mating displays, this, that, and the other thing. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of different purposes for these different colorations that are getting picked up in a spectrum of light that we just can't perceive. And I really thought, how does this correspond to how Sasquatch might do this? And the red eyes start to make a lot of sense then, because they're often described as eyes being a lot bigger than ours. So they might be filtering the nighttime UV light from the ambient starlight and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be filtered into the eyes. And what we might be seeing is the reflection of that in the back of the eye, making that red eye shine look. Now they utilize this to see their environment in the dark and hunt and definitely see prey. Because if all these animals are fluorescing at night with all these different colors, it would make hunting a heck of a lot easier. And then I heard on another podcast that Doug Highcheck from Monster Quest, he did a UV study on caribou and grizzly bears up in the north. And what he found was they can actually use UV to see the protein and sugar content of plants. So whenever you see a nature documentary and you see a bear that's browsing on a bush here, and then he wanders off 20 yards away and starts browsing over there instead, makes you wonder why he's rummaging around so much instead of staying in one spot to eat all the bushes right there.
Yeah.
But what he's seeing is the most bang for his buck food, and he's not wasting time eating all the plants that are not nutritious enough. So it makes complete sense why they would do this.
It sure does.
So I dove in and bought myself an ultraviolet flashlight for doing my own research at night. And I happen to live on a farm, so I have some really good controls.
Please tell me you got it at Canadian Tire since you're Canadian.
No, unfortunately. Did not find it at Canadian Tire. But I took it out when the corn was high and there's big fields of alfalfa and everything like that. And I know those are good for protein and sugar content for farm animals. Mm-hmm. So I took my flashlight out at night, and you can actually see protein and sugar content in the plant life.
That's amazing.
It really is. Once I got the flashlight, you see a whole world that you never knew existed that's just layered on top of what we already see. It's beyond the mundane human experience. There's this whole other level of communication that happens around us that we just have no idea about. And it's helped understand a lot of the way the animals and plants communicate together too. When you see a daisy, they're just plain white flowers with a little yellow pollen bit in the center. Mm-hmm. But when you put them under the UV, those white petals have fancy fluorescent runways down the flower petal to help attract insects to pollinate them. Mm. They are a negatively charged plant. Bees are positively charged. So I've also found out that plants can sing in a frequency that we can't hear. And bees can hear this. And flowers can also hear the humming of a beehive. So the flower will tilt its head in the direction of the humming of the beehive, so that the bees can see the flower a little bit easier. They can hear the flower. So they come out to pollinate the flower. They sense the negative charge on the flower. And when they land, they exchange protons and electrons. And the pollen magnetizes to the bee. It gets a good drink of nectar. And then when it leaves, that flower is now positively charged. So when the next bee comes along, it knows not to pollinate that specific flower. So there's so much harmony and communication going on that we just have never thought of.
A whole different world out there.
Oh, yeah. It goes beyond just ultraviolet light. It goes into infrared. It goes into positive light, negative light, and all kinds of different magnetic frequencies, infrasound, ultrasound. There's so much depth to the world and so much left to explore that it makes things really exciting.
It does.
Like if you were to overlay all this information into a way that we could perceive, it would almost look like the movie Avatar.
Okay.
The way that everything is so fancy and colorful. I think at one point in our history, humans were able to perceive all this, but due to our use of technology, we have adapted out of being able to do it. Now, where we see it in today's culture is whenever you go into one of those gift shops or a smoke shop or whatever, and there's all those ultraviolet posters.
Yep.
And for like the party scene. Those are the same colors that you will find out in nature. Now, we perceive them through the use of psychedelics.
Yep.
Now, to me, that would indicate that is just a connection of synapses in the brain that don't normally connect. So the wiring would be there already. It's just a matter of making that connection.
That's fascinating.
Really,
we
gives you a lot to think about.
No kidding. We don't have a use to see in that spectrum anymore because we use light 24/7 pretty much.
Well, if you take it way back, you could go back to the caveman days where we were all living in the dark. We didn't have fire. There would be a sentry kept up at night to look after the ones that are sleeping. They would need to see in that spectrum. We start having fire around us, creating all this ambient light, and you no longer can perceive that ultraviolet because the other light overtakes the ultraviolet. So that would start the adaptation into not using it anymore.
It's interesting. You probably already know this. I don't know if it's under UV light, but there's a specific light spectrum that if you look at humans, we actually have stripes. We don't see it.
Actually, every living cell on this planet emits ultraviolet light. So us as humans, we are emitting our own frequency of ultraviolet light. So a really good way to visualize this is the cuttlefish. Whenever you see a cuttlefish communicate with each other, it's just flashing light and changing of colors, and that's very much what happens when we're going through emotions, changing our intentions, all that. It just happens in a way that we can't perceive, but everything else seems to be able to. So that kind of lets animals know your intentions, which is kind of neat because like how do they know? It's because they can see it.
Yeah.
It's very, very much like the cuttlefish.
I've always wondered because you hear so many people with Sasquatch experiences. Some of them say it was very peaceful and they had a very positive experience. And then you have other people who say, no, they are evil beings. They just want to rip our heads off. But maybe they can see the color of our intent. Some people are going to be naturally violent and they're going to see something they don't understand. They just want to kill it right away. So maybe the Sasquatch sees that and knows not like this person is not friendly, as opposed to other people that just like want to have a positive experience and they actually see the intent. They literally see it.
Correct. And I think that's why even if a hunter thinks they're camouflaged super well, the Sasquatch can still see them because you're not thinking of the fluorescent signature of your clothing. So even some camouflage will have a little bit of the hunter orange on it. That will show up like a hot damn under UV.
Yeah.
And, you know, your eyes and everything would also be emitting a light signature as well. The one part of the body that emits the most light out of a human is the tongue. So if you're sitting there with your mouth wide open, you're going to be emitting a lot of ultraviolet light.
I wonder why the tongue in particular.
That goes into a whole other discussion.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast.
But that's fascinating.
That kind of goes into the power of the word. But yeah, the tongue is the one spot on the body that emits the most light. Our bones actually work like LEDs, and they emit a red light.
A red light?
And that has a red brownish light.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that has actually been measured scientifically. Most of the spectrum that we emit is not perceivable because it's in such a frequency that we don't quite have the photomultiplier in order to perceive it yet.
Okay.
So with my flashlight, what I'm seeing is just below visual spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a whole other levels below that in which we don't have the tools yet to see that.
Now, do you think that, like, say a creature like Sasquatch that can see the different colors on us, are they able to see our bones through the flesh as well? Like, would it radiate through the flesh?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting to know.
That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
I have, however, seen a photo of a chameleon in the ultraviolet. Mm-hmm. And their bones stick out through their skin. So you can see the whole skeleton of the chameleon in the ultraviolet.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to go get myself a flashlight now.
There's a lot of exploration that can be done. I use it for rock hounding all the time, too. I have rocks that I adore called euperlites. Mm-hmm. They're actually around the Great Lakes.
Oh.
And when you put the UV light on them, they look like a burning coal out of a hot fire. But when you look at it in normal spectrum light, they just look like any other stone. Mm-hmm. So that also goes into Sasquatch culture. We also hear Sasquatch throw rocks at us all the time.
Yep.
What if these rocks are the ones that are fluorescing? Now, you can take that to gift site evidence. People will leave out food for the Sasquatch. They often get rocks or feathers in return. Seems rather mundane to us. But what if they're communicating to us on another level with fluorescent rocks or feathers that have a specific fluorescent pattern on them? So what might seem mundane to us might be very significant to the Sasquatch. Then you get stories of little tiny pebbles being thrown at us. That could be very entertaining if those were like tracer bullets.
Yeah.
And you can see them flying through the air before they almost hit us. Or they do hit us. One of the two.
Yep.
Even pine cones, like the pitch on them, will fluoresce in a way that you can see. So if they're throwing pine cones, that would be very visible as well. However, when they start throwing boulders, I think a boulder is just a boulder.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
time to go.
Yeah, that's like, get out of Dodge.
That's a different message.
Yeah. So when I first started investigating the paranormal, I had somebody tell me that, and it's such a good piece of advice, whenever you buy any equipment, make sure you understand what your equipment does and why. You're not, just because you buy it at a paranormal site and they say it's for ghost hunting, no, just look at it as a piece of equipment that you have and understand how it works and what it's actually looking for. So when I bought my FLIR, I went around the house and I was like a maniac. My family was like, "What are you doing?" I would put my hand on the wall, use the FLIR, I'd see the handprint, I'd go back 5 minutes later, and it's starting to fade, but it's still there. I would touch my dog's back, I would get somebody to sit on the couch. I was experimenting with everything. So it kind of reminds me of what you're doing with your UV, like you're trying to see how that works.
Correct. And you can see handprints with the UV as well. But what that's doing is not picking up the heat signature, it's picking up the hand oil signature, which can be tested for DNA. So this would come very handy for researchers, especially when you hear stories of Sasquatch peeking into houses and putting their face against the glass or their hand against the house.
Yeah.
Or slapping trailers or any of that. You could take the UV flashlight, find that handprint, and collect DNA on a Q-tip or something.
Oh, I'm just mind blown. It's just things that I've never thought of before. It brings it to a whole new level.
When you start to put it in a human perspective, we do the same thing in forensics with police investigations.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Why is Sasquatch any different?
Interesting.
So you start treating a Sasquatch encounter like a crime scene properly, and you can use all the same tools. You know, I probably wouldn't use the luminol if you want to collect DNA, but
yeah,
it would be able to pick up that handprint on the side of your house. And the oils that come off the hand is actually called sebum and will hold DNA. It's like for Sasquatch especially, it's like a white waxy substance. I've heard of other researchers that have tried the UV approach, but they're doing it on children's balls that they will inflate and leave out in a meadow and hope that Sasquatch will play with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll try to get the hand oils off of the ball if the ball gets moved.
Would you be able to get hand oils, like say they were up against a tree? Would you still be able to collect that? Or would the tree, like especially if it was a sappy tree, might contaminate? I don't know.
That might be a good question for a DNA analysis.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not too sure. It would definitely help with trying to find hair, maybe, because it might get caught in the bark. And I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Dr. Jeff Meldrum at a Sasquatch conference in Washington. And I had talked to him about this ultraviolet theory, and he thought it was rather interesting. And he told me he had it on good authority that Sasquatch hair will fluoresce.
Interesting.
Now, if you look at a picture of a chimpanzee when they're fluoresced, the hair kind of goes green. So I imagine it's something similar.
Yeah. Like I said, it opens up a whole new world.
Yes. Now I'm going to give you another fun fact about how some prey species see and why Sasquatch might be colored the way they do. Now, when we get descriptions of the reddy brown Sasquatch, it doesn't make a lot of sense if they're anywhere outside of a big cedar forest, because the bark's there rather reddish. It seems like they would stick out like a sore thumb to us.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe to our eyesight, but prey species like deer cannot see the colors red or orange. Now, the way that translates is what they see, what is red or orange, is just another shade of green to them. So when a tiger is hiding in the grass and it's hunting a deer, its orange and black stripes break up its pattern because it'll be black and green, very much like camouflage on a hunter, and the deer cannot see them very well at all. If you put a color lens filter on a tiger and you try to find where the tiger is in the photo when the orange is taken away, good luck.
Wow.
So it makes perfect sense why the Sasquatch might express as a reddish color. Nature, especially in mammals, we cannot create green pigment naturally. So they've found the workaround, and that is to express in the red or orange type color. Might be why cats are so good at hunting mice too.
Maybe. Wow. It's just, like I said, mind blown. So in that podcast that I heard you on, because I told you I just listened to the, 1.5 podcast, but you had mentioned about red eye shine and then like a goldish yellow eye shine. And it made me wonder if Sasquatch or any other living creature on this planet are able to change their eyes to look at different light spectrum. So maybe there's the same creature, or were they two different creatures, or you know where I'm going with that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because, maybe it is another creature. Because typically animals tend to have the same color eye shine across the board. However, Sasquatch is a conundrum. And I think if we look at the movie The Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, what does the predator do in order to see his prey? He switches his spectrum.
Yep.
And whether he's fighting the alien, he goes into another spectrum. And then when he switches to hunting humans, he switches back to infrared. So maybe it is something very similar. And how animals might do that is simply just a inner eyelid, like a crocodile.
Yeah, and cats also have another eyelid, I think, if I remember correctly.
That would be interesting too.
Yeah.
That would be a mammal with another eyelid that would possibly be able to see another spectrum just by having a transparent eyelid.
Yeah. Something to delve into to find out more information.
Yes. I did a really big deep dive on how humans work with sunlight. And it has a lot to do with how we produce our own light. And it all comes down to melanin in the skin. And we have a lot of health complications because we stay indoors all the time and we're not getting proper light absorption like we properly should.
Yep.
We often consider ourselves outside of the bounds of nature, and that causes us a lot of problems. Now, when we hear stories of Sasquatch and what the skin looks like, it's often described as an ashy gray color. And to me, that would indicate a ton of melanin. They probably just sit there and soak up the sun during the day, and then at nighttime, they're able to hunt in the UV and have so much energy to do so.
Like solar panels.
Basically, only difference between how we process energy and how a plant photosynthesizes is a couple minerals.
Really?
It's really close. So if we start treating ourselves like plants, you get a lot of healthier lifestyle.
I went back to school a few years ago, and the college that I went to, they actually had in the library 2 special lamps. It was for people who are depressed or just having a hard time concentrating. You could sit there and they turn the lamp on, and it's mimicking the sun's rays. So
Infrared lighting.
Yeah. So
Yes.
and I'm seeing more and more of those.
I had just really wanted to do that. Like in my office, it is UV lighting, so I can have it for podcasts, and it helps me see my research material a lot better. Really good for the skin, despite what they say. And those infrared lighting, that's the top tier recovery tool that they use for athletes these days.
Really?
So cold plunges and infrared sauna baths. Now, most mainstream sources for that, those panels are super expensive. However, you can go down to a farm market and pick up an infrared chicken light, and it will do the same thing.
Really? You found a workaround.
$2 or $3.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So instead of spending like $3,000-$4,000 on a LED infrared light panel, you can just get a chicken light and have it do the same effect.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You're brilliant.
You just got to think outside the box.
Yeah. And I find, myself included, I find most people who are investigating any aspect of the paranormal, I find a lot of people just have the blinders on and just they're trying to think outside the box, but it doesn't really work, or they don't know how to think outside the box. But yeah, that's amazing.
When you're trying to put together a puzzle and you're focusing on one piece so hard, it is really hard to find where that one piece goes until you back up a bit and start looking at the whole picture. Yep. So in order to understand how Sasquatch works properly, understand how everything else in that environment works first. And then you can really understand how they work, why they work. You know, if they're nocturnal, find out why they're nocturnal. Mm-hmm. How is nocturnal communication happening beyond wood knocks or something that we can perceive? You start looking at all the other nocturnal animals, how they communicate and work, and it starts to make a lot more sense. Even that infrasound subject, you can pick up infrasound on an EMF detector.
Now that I did not know.
Yeah.
Because infrasound detectors are really expensive.
Yep. You can pick them up on EMF.
How?
And I'm not sure how that works.
Wow. I have to look into that.
Yeah. You should not be getting EMF signal out in the forest. So if you start getting pings on your EMF detector, you might be picking up infrasound.
Huh.
Unless you're near power lines, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I did an investigation in Alberta once. It was a 3-story building, very old. It was gutted. There's no wires, no plumbing, nothing. But I was told that the top floor towards the back, with an EMF detector, it was just crazy. It was just light up. So people were convinced that there was paranormal activity there. But of course, me being me, I have to find out, well, why? You know, there's like I said, it's gutted. There's no wires, plumbing, everything. So then I realized when I looked out the back window that 8 to 10 feet away from the building are the power lines, and there's a metal fire escape ladder on the building. Well, I know that the power lines aren't 100% shielded, so that's why I was getting EMF.
Kind of work like an antenna.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There was a case that I heard of in an office building where there was this corner office, and the worker that was in there started to suffer from mental breakdowns. And so they moved this person out of there, moved someone else in, and they also started to suffer from mental breakdowns. Moved them out, put another one in, mental breakdowns. Couldn't figure out what was going on. So they really did an investigation of that office. And the end result ended up being that a mechanic for the air conditioning unit replaced the belt with a belt that was the wrong size. So it made an infrasound wave that went down the air conditioning shaft, and it was just enough of an irritant that we can't perceive that it drove them insane.
Wow. I don't know if you've heard of this paper. It's called Ghost in the Machine. I have a PDF file. I'll have to send it to you. It's this man who again, he was working in this lab, and people were seeing things, blobs from the corner of their eyes. They were convinced it was haunted. Come to find out, at the other end of the office, there was a huge fan that was just off kilter a little bit, and it was emitting infrasound. So he started, so he started studying infrasound. Very, very fascinating paper. I can't remember who wrote it now, but yeah, it was amazing. So we've always told people when we investigate their homes or businesses, just because it goes bump in the night doesn't mean it's paranormal. It could just be, a bad, like the fuse box, the what's that called? Why do I always forget?
Breaker panel?
Breaker panel, thank you, yes. And that was the case in one of the investigations we had, where they said there was a lot of paranormal activity in that particular area, and they had it encased behind a cupboard. And we asked, well, what's behind the cupboard? We opened up, and it was the breaker panel, and we showed them the EMF, and it was just lighting up, and we're like, yeah, you need to call an electrician and get that fixed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you a story about one of the most curious things that I've ever experienced that comes to frequency. And this is my UFO sighting.
Ooh.
This was back in around 2009 in August. I was watching the meteor showers that happened mid-August. And I was out on the back deck with an ex-girlfriend and my little brother. And as we're watching this meteor shower, we're watching the satellites and everything that are passing by in the sky. And there's two satellites that look like they're about to collide. And I was kind of wondering if they were going to impact, because they really look like they were on the same trajectory. Mm. And then right at the last minute, one of them starts following the other one. Like, just flips around 180. And I'm like, well, satellites can't do that. Something weird is going on here.
Yeah.
They both seem to be aware that we were aware of them. They stop, drop down in the atmosphere, and I'm in you know where I live.
Yeah.
But we're in a valley surrounded by mountains, with a lake in front of the town. And they drop down and start shooting from mountaintop to mountaintop in front of the town, just boom, 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 and start doing all these fancy aerial dances with each other. And they
satellites don't do that.
They definitely don't do that. They had light panels on them when they came lower in the atmosphere that you could see. And it looked like a triangle in an upside down position. So the tip is facing down.
Yeah.
And it worked like a mood light. So the top corner would start off a color, and then clockwise it would shift colors through this triangle. So it's constantly shifting different color spectrum. And then they dance around some more. Blink, blink, blink with the colors, and then shift around, blink, blink, blink. And then they just zoomed back up in the atmosphere and blipped out of vision. And then a minute or so goes by, and we're flipping out on the deck, because that was just phenomenal.
Definitely meteors. No.
Definitely. One of them came back. And it starts doing the dance across from mountaintop to mountaintop again. And this is a fairly cloudless night. There was one little cloud sitting over top of town. And where the house I was at was situated on the top of the hill. So as this thing came down, it went into the cloud. And that light display illuminated the cloud. So you could actually see the full scope of the craft. And it was your typical flying saucer that was about the size of a rancher house. It came back out of the cloud again, and it just sat there. And it did the light display, But as it's doing the colors, it showed me a color that doesn't exist.
Can you describe it?
The best way I can describe it is that it would be off the spectrum from ultraviolet. Now, this is 2009, and 2 years ago, I'm messing around while I'm hunting, and I find this website called mapsquatch.com. And it has all these different sighting reports, kind of like the Bigfoot mapping project, but it includes ghost sightings, UFO encounters, dogman.
What's it called
the
again?
gambit. Mapsquatch.com. And so I got really curious, and I went to my town and I start looking at all this different sighting reports there, and they're all UFO reports. So I'm scrolling down and reading all the stories while I'm sitting there waiting for a deer to come out. And I find one from 2009, the night that I saw the UFOs.
Wow.
And someone had seen the very first half of that aerial dance display where they came down the two ships and then left. And then after that, they just continued walking up the trail that they were on and did not see when the ship came back. But it was really cool to have that corroborating evidence.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then as I'm doing all my research into frequency and how light works, I learn of a theoretical color called negative green. And the reason it's called negative green is because it sits on the color pie opposite of green, kind of right beside black and white. So they don't actually have a proper name for this theoretical color. They just theorize that it exists. And I am really convinced that what I saw would have been negative green. But it is the biggest paradox to try to describe a color that no one else has ever seen before.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like if you're colorblind and someone's trying to describe a color to you, you just have no concept. It's impossible to do. And then I start hearing stories about Project Centerlane with remote viewing and astral projection. A lot of the people that report doing those studies talk about seeing colors that don't exist. So there's so much unknown out in the universe that we have yet to learn about. And I've been lucky enough to experience a small fraction of it. And I'm really excited to see where all this research goes.
Me too. Wow. So there's a lot of people out there that think that Sasquatch and UFOs, there's a correlation there. Do you think there is?
Good question. I think if there is any correlation at all, you gotta think of the abduction phenomenon. The aliens are abducting us to study humans, correct? Sasquatch, as far as the DNA study is gone, they are mitochondrial DNA human. Now, if you're an alien, would you not want to study a humanoid that looks very similar to your other test subject?
Yes.
So I don't think Sasquatch is alien. I think they are also being abducted and studied just the same, if there is any correlation at all.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories of abductees that are on these cold observation tables, and beside them is also a Sasquatch strapped down in the same condition as them. So, no, I don't think they are the ones flying the craft. Honestly, my theory about Sasquatch as to what they are, I think possibly they are the original human on Earth. And through other genetic manipulation and whatnot, we get the results of us modern day humans. But I think they might have been the most mainstream human that is on this planet. They are able to survive in any environment, and we've adapted ourselves to be so weak that we cannot. We seem to be the odd duck out on this planet, actually, in terms of survival. Now, Sasquatch is observed around the world, everywhere, except for maybe Hawaii. Now, that's a really curious fact.
Yeah, that is. I recently interviewed Thomas. I'm sorry, Thomas, if I...
Seawood.
Yes, Seawood, if I mangle his last name. And he believes that Sasquatch is just another... they're people. He doesn't really believe in the woo-woo. Have you ever spoken with him?
No, but I've heard him interviewed quite a lot.
Yeah, especially on Sasquatch Chronicles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an incredible gentleman.
He is. Yeah, seems down to earth. I really enjoyed speaking with him. Yeah.
And a fellow British Columbian.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So what's there not to love?
Exactly.
So we're at the tail end here. I would absolutely love to bring you back at some point and discuss more of your research. But this is incredible. I really love speaking with you. I mean, the way that you think, it just makes us think outside the box and just think of other. Our human world. There's more beyond that.
Yes,
a lot of people,
beyond the mundane.
Yeah. I mean, who are we to think that the world that we see, that's all there is? Well, us who investigate the paranormal know there's more beyond, but you've really opened up my mind to other things that I want to research as well. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure to open minds and have that perspective broadened, because it makes life so much more exciting.
It does. Yeah. Because like I told you before we started recording, I was giddy when I heard you on that other podcast. And it's just certain things that I had thought of in the past few years. And then here you are talking about that and more. So it really made me, I was so excited.
Oh, yes. One of my to-do lists is to go mushrooms.
Is to what, sorry?
Go see what... research mushrooms in ultraviolet.
Oh, that would be... Here, it might be a stupid question, but when you use UV light, do you use it daytime or nighttime, or does it matter?
Mostly at night.
Mostly at night, yeah. Would anything show up during the day? Probably not as well as during the dark.
Not very well. No.
Yeah, okay.
Nighttime is really the time to use it. There is fancy camera kits that you can buy that you can use during the daytime, but they're rather expensive.
Yeah. I don't have money for that.
Yeah, they've only just started coming to market too, so they're big and bulky. But it's very interesting that you can just go around in the daytime and do way more research than you normally could.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Bumping around in the dark is not always the most productive.
I am very klutzy, and if there's a hole in the ground, like the only hole in 50 miles, I'm going to find it. So, yeah. So can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, you can get a hold of me easily on Instagram at Chucky_danger. And that has a lot of my ultraviolet photos. And if you ever have a question about things, just send it on over. I'll happily answer. I am a co-host on the Countercult podcast. And you can find us on any regular podcatcher and on Rumble if you want to see our pretty faces as we talk. Yeah, that'd be a good place to find me.
Now, I might be showing my age here, but I've never even heard of Rumble.
Rumble is actually a Canadian podcatcher.
Really?
That recently came out, and they also promote video format.
Nice.
But they kind of jump around the issue of censorship on the main platforms. So there's a lot more free speech. And so it's really encouraging a lot of podcasts to go there so they don't get silenced.
And we both know that as Canadians, it seems to be that they're trying to take away a lot of our free speech, but that's another topic for a different show.
Yes, I'd happy to have you on the Countercult podcast to discuss that.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's very nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you as well. Take care. Well, we've made it to the end of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, take care of each other. And if you'd like to be on the show or have questions and comments, just drop me an email, paranormalheart13@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Paranormal Heart would like to extend a special thank you to purpleplanet.com for supplying the music for the show. The views and opinions expressed on Paranormal Heart are those of the host and participants.
Paranormal Heart Podcast.